allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we are gathered here today for a budget workshop. And we'll start with my favorite category, revenues.
Yes, good evening, Mr. Mayor and City Council. Miscellaneous revenues start on page 13 of your budget book. We have an overall increase of all revenue sources of $332,152, or 2.87%. Kind of looking at them by category. So the first category is excise tax and interest. We have an overall increase here of $65,200. Motor vehicle excise tax, we're anticipating increasing by $60,000. Again, I'm not sure where people are putting these cars. Those of you who've been down in the hallway, people are still lining up to register. So not only are the amounts that they're registering increasing, but the volume is still right there with prior year counts as well. So we anticipate that growing strong, or continuing to grow strong for next year, as well as increases on interest on taxes by about $5,500.
Heather always gets nervous, however, given how much auto excise has grown over the last few years, that people are going to stop buying cars. And then, as you know, new vehicles depreciate pretty quickly for excise tax purposes. So she gets nervous about that one.
As long as they keep lining up. And just kind of as an informational tidbit, the interest on taxes is set by the state, and it remains at 7%. I think it's been that rate for at least the last 5, if not close to 7 years, so that hasn't changed. License and permit are at the bottom of page 13 and continue at the top of page 14. We have an overall increase here of $12,600, or 3.47%. We have a lot of small fluctuations in this category, with kind of the driving force being building inspector fees for $5,000, restaurant licenses increase for $1,500, electrical permits $750, and other license and permits for $2,500. And then along with the excise tax, you have the motor vehicle fees, so we anticipate those increasing by $1,200 along with plumbing fees. We did have one reduction, and it was not, it's probably the most significant in this category, but it's not significant overall, and that's in taxi licenses. That shrank by about $900. The other kind of wild card next to motor vehicle excise tax is intergovernmental revenue, which is the next category that's on the bottom of page 14, continuing the top of page 15. We're anticipating an overall increase here of $82,612, with general assistance growing by just under $32,000. And again, that takes into consideration the 70% rate of reimbursement. We had an increase of eligible cost of $45,600, so that net between the two that falls on the tax rate, as a reminder, is about $13,680. Highway funds have increased by $7,500. Again, that's a category that tends to be somewhat volatile, along with state truck reimbursement. When we published the document, we didn't have state revenue sharing numbers. Those are out. So when I talk about adjustments or proposed adjustments for the council to consider on Thursday, you will see some revised state revenue sharing numbers. We are also, based upon the tax rate increase of our sister city, we are also anticipating air park taxes to increase by about $19,000. And the formula that the Lewiston Housing Authority uses to calculate their pilot payment produced an additional $24,000. Charges for services continue on page 15, and then at the top at page 16. We have an overall increase here of $76,670. Once again, a lot of, bless you, a lot of small fluctuations, with the driving force being an increase in the transfer station tipping fees of $60,000. As you might remember, we consolidated a lot of the fees out at the solid waste facility, and they're now all being charged or credited to that tipping fee account. We also, looking at all of our parking facilities, have an overall increase there of about $20,300. Fines and forfeitures are in the middle of page 16. We have an overall increase there of $5,000. The new fire fees established back in FY17 still didn't generate the expected revenue that we anticipated, so that's been reduced by about $950. And then we have false alarms for both police and fire, along with parking violations, that each one of those three rose about $2,000 apiece. Interest, rents, and revenues at the bottom of page 16, top of page 17. Have an overall increase there of just under $90,000 or 6%. We're finally starting to see some interest income that we used to see several years ago. As everybody knows, the interest rates, the downside is when we borrow, the upside is when we're investing, we're reaping the benefit of those higher rates. So we anticipate about a $50,000 increase in investment income. Our franchise fee collections are up about $1,800. We have a CPI adjustment in the Casella lease that generated an additional $1,400. The monthly parking portion of the parking facilities rose by $36,000 with the Ash Park Street facility and the Chestnut Street facility probably being the biggest contributor of that increase, respectively. You will see, as a reminder, when we talked about the Violations Bureau, when we went through the buildings, you will see a proposed revenue adjustment decreasing the rental income there by about $70,000. That's part of Thursday night's adjustments as well. Miscellaneous revenue, which is the last category on the middle of page 17, we have an overall increase here. It's essentially flat funded at $700. The market pricing for the sale of various materials has increased slightly by $2,000. Unclassified revenues and the CPI adjustment for the Mariner Tower lease increased by about $1,600 and the tower about $7,000, which offset the decrease in sale of surplus property of $10,000 based upon what's slated for disposal in upcoming property dispositions. Questions on any of the revenue items? So the next category is library. I'll invite Marcella up to join us.
Page 71.
Yes, 71 and 72. So as a reminder, the library department had a new request to fund an additional library technician for the reference area for about $34,664, and that is net of temporary wages.
Could we have, if Marcella would like to give us the sales pitch?
So we lost a position back in fiscal year 14, along with about 40% of our materials that year. So this is books, AV materials, anything. Oh, sorry. So anything that the library adds to its collection has to be processed through our collection services department, and the position that was cut was in that department. Since then, we've worked to restore those numbers, and this year would actually lead to a full restoration, but we haven't had a position put back in that department. So we'd essentially be asking 2 employees to do the same work that 3 were doing back in fiscal year 14. And that's becoming excessively difficult already with the number that we've managed to add so far. So we're looking to add a little bit back in staffing.
Is that in the budget?
No. So library administration, again, is on the top of page 71. Had an overall decrease there of $20,413, or 13.6%. The lion's share of that fell in the personal services category of about $19,500 due to attrition of the previous library director. We had a decrease of contractual services of $500 due to a decrease in repairs to equipment due to the copier agreement there, and a small decrease in supplies of $350 based upon historical usage of office supplies. The lending services division is at the bottom of page 71. We have an overall increase there of $37,500, or 7.83%. The increase in personal services represents $22,900. And again, that's through the step increases and contract wages that you saw in other departments, as well as just shy of $8,000 in increase in temporary wages due to the additional building monitor, the increase in minimum wage, and so forth. Contractual services declined by $60 in printing based upon historical averages, and then we saw an increase in supplies of $14,657, which is the total of the increase in all the various book budgets and programming, restoring those funds incrementally. So they're back kind of to where they were prior to the recession. They are still not funded, you know, at the levels that we had well prior to that.
Yeah, just so you know, in fiscal year 2008, we spent about almost $130,000 on library materials, books, and other materials. This year, the budget was $70,000, so it was about 54% of what it was in 08. This budget would get us up to about 2/3 of what we used to spend, but closer to what we were spending in fiscal 13. So we have been slowly trying to increase the materials, supplies, purchases budget to get a little bit closer to where we used to be.
The collection service division, which is on the top of page 72, had an overall increase of $6,000, or 3.36%, and that is all made up in personal services. The building account, it's the last division in the library, had an overall decrease of $27,452, or 13.6%. We had a decrease in the personal service of $6,100, which is the cross-charging from the Public Works building maintenance people based upon how they've kind of allocated their time. We also had a decrease of $21,852 in contractual services. The lion's share of that is in utilities of $18,825. Repairs to buildings, just shy of $4,300, also represents another decrease in that division, and that was offset by a slight increase in cleaning services. And we have a minor increase in supplies of $500 based upon consumption of household supplies. Questions regarding the library?
Noticing building and structures requested was $194,000. What would
Yeah.
that have been?
That was for windows replacements, and we have looked at moving that over to fund balance. part of the discussion during kind of those general discussion nights is to review one more time everything that's been recommended to fund through fund balance, to make sure that's still something that everybody wants to keep in as that funding source.
Did you say that the new request would net to zero, or did I make that up?
The new request on the personal
Because
service?
it would get it would take away temporary wages?
No, the
No.
net effect, including the decrease in temporary wages,
Thank you.
was $34,600.
Thank you.
Is there any money being used from the endowment?
Yes. Marcella?
We could talk about that a little, just.
Yes, so the endowment is allocated by the library board each year, and it's an average of the past, it's 4% of the past few years of the balance of the endowment. And that, the board makes a determination each year, usually based on how this process goes, on what they can then make up for any shortfalls. And in recent years, almost about 1/3 of that budget has gone towards materials. Another about 10,000 has gone towards programming for all ages. And then we have professional development is another piece of that. And any general equipment repairs and things that don't fall into the city budget that just kind of are emergent go under that as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marcella. Debt service is the next category on page 73. It's kind of a topic we've already reviewed, but just to kind of give you a quick rundown. As it was published, the overall increase was $851,000, or just shy of 11%, with the split of principal $720 and interest of $130,000. Once the council gave the indication that they were okay postponing that first interest payment to 2020, the increase in principal was reduced to $97,000, and the increase in interest was reduced to about $22,000. And as a reminder, based upon the rate environment right now, there is no refunding schedule. I will kind of run through a couple trend type of items. Since the debt limitation was approved in 2009 and then revised in 2011, there's only been one instances of the approval have been over the limitation. And that's when we did the middle school addition along with the McMahon addition. I'm happy to say, and this is the statistic that I tend to track and like to shine a little bit, and we kind of harp on this a little bit with the rating agency as well, where we can actually say within the next 5 years, we will be paying 50% of our debt off for general fund. In the next 10 years, we will be paying off 82% of our debt. So that's a pretty staggering amount. And it kind of hopefully should give you some reassurance based upon what we have coming up on the LCIP slates with the fire substations and so forth. Yes, that'll drag that out a little bit, but we've structured our position the city in a pretty decent position going into those heavy capital outlays. As a reminder, in the last 10 years, we've paid off just shy of $16 million in outstanding interest. Our peak was in 2005, or in 13 years, we eliminated $23.1 million, or 78% of the interest balance in 13 years. During that same period, the outstanding principal was reduced by $30 million, or 42%. So it's kind of just nice to hear those statistics every once in a while, especially when we're looking at some of the capital outlay that we're considering over the next several years. So after that, we have the intergovernmental agencies on page 74. We have an overall increase here of $270,850, or 6.8%. The Lewiston Auburn, or the Auburn Lewiston Airport had an overall increase of $67,000, or just under 64%. I'll ask the airport manager to come up, Rick Landman. That way he can join us if there's any questions. I will kind of remind you, at least for the new counselors, even though the request has increased by $67,000, the prior council elected to fund $60,600 last year for deferred maintenance items through fund balance. So that's why we're seeing such a jump. If we would have funded all of that through the operations, that would have normalized that a little bit from
Is
the
there
local
anything
share.
in this budget that can be paid out of fund balance?
Not as easily as it was last year.
Okay.
We are looking at funding the local share of the runway of $10,000 through fund balance. So that won't be part of operations. So kind of looking at his budget in totality, he had increases in revenues of just shy of $59,000, or 5%. The lion's share of that growth is in fuel sales, over $60,000, due to both quantity and pricing. You will also see the corresponding increase in fuel cost of $49,000. So that kind of offsets when one price increases for the sales. Obviously, the cost to supply that commodity also increases. Overall expenditures rose by $66,000, or 4.4%. Looking at both operationally and the FBO, those are kind of the airport's two divisions. On the operational side, we had an increase of personal services of about $3,900. The airport doesn't give standard COLAs, but that does allow for merit adjustments. Overtime is flat. Fringe benefits actually decreased by $2,200 based upon through attrition and what the new employees have elected for fringe benefits. They, like the city of Lewiston, are all on the PPO 500 plan. They're experiencing the same main state retirement and main PERS adjustments that we have at the city level for the PLD. They did have an increase of just shy of $3,000 for professional development due to certifications and licensing continuing education requirements that are needed. The operational side decreased by $5,481, or just under 1%. On-call engineering services fell by $1,500, utilities by $5,000, and then a net reduction in the maintenance accounts of $2,800. And then the reduction in the annual audit of $2,700. And that offsets kind of the increase in general insurances that we found. The FBO side of the operations, the personal services rose there by $2,300, broken down between $6,300 in salaries, and the rest are $17,000 in fringe benefits. Again, it's based upon turnover and staffing and what they elect for fringe benefit. The non-personal side of the FBO rose by $48,500, and it's primarily driven by the cost of fuel purchases at $49,000. Questions?
Excellent.
Thanks, Rick.
Thanks, Rick.
Just one, sorry, I hate to be
So
nitpicky, but
close, so close.
every page says FY '18 operations budget.
Oops.
Just something you might want to update for your records is all.
Yeah.
I think the one that's on the city's website
Okay.
has got that update already.
Great.
Thank you.
And we'll be hopefully seeing you at a tour.
I look forward to it.
So we've been trying to figure out a good date, but look forward to that to see.
Great, look forward to it. Thank
He's
you.
going to put you in an airplane and take you around.
Not out of the question.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Rick.
Rick.
The next agency is the LA Transit Committee. They had an overall increase of just shy of $12,000, or 4.9%. As a reminder, the city budgets their portion of the bus replacement, or $50,000, through fund balance. Marcia, you want to come up? And kind of my summary is assuming existing services as they stand right now, not expanding it back with full service with Auburn. So non-subsidy revenues rose by $41,000, which included increase in federal funding of $31,230, fare box revenue of about $26,000. Both of those offset decreases in advertising of $11,500, a small decrease in vending sales of $800, and the Auburn side of the subsidy rose by about $9,200. So when you look at their category, the first category they have is the fixed route costs. That rose by about $40,500, and that's primarily based upon two cost drivers. One is the increase in the Western Main Transit contract of just shy of $11,000, and then the projected cost of fuel sales also impacts that particular division heavily of $24,650. We also had a $5,000 increase in projected project administration based upon civil rights reporting and other general overhead cost adjustments. The paratransit portion of the budget rose by $1,500, which is all in the Western Main Transit contract. Then you have the bus station, the two bus station and the general operating cost had a decrease of $1,000. You had a lot of small fluctuations there, so you had increases in janitorial of $400 and snow removal and miscellaneous, but those were offset by decreases of $1,000 in supplies and utilities, as well as a small decrease in legal of $500. So do you want to talk about, yep.
Yeah, one of the things we need to make you aware of is we got some news from the federal government recently that negatively impacted the amount of funding that we receive from the federal government. That's not reflected in the numbers that were presented here. Basically, there is a incentive program offered through the Federal Transit Administration where if your system exceeds certain benchmarks, you can receive additional federal subsidy. We have received that for some time. This, as of the current year and going forward next year, we will not be receiving that subsidy. That's about $160,000, $180,000. The system will be covering that shortfall this year because it will affect first this year's budget by using its fund balance. And it has a fund balance of about $250,000, so it'll be spending that down to 40 or so, 40 or 50,000. And they are proposing to transfer some federal funds that are set aside and identified for capital purposes into next year's budget, into their operating budget, and the feds have approved that, which will make up for the loss of federal money. That does impact capital funding, but we've also heard from the state that they will assist us in making up at least some of that loss. So we can get through. The net effect of all of this on the city's budget for next year is zero, but the year after, we will not be able to look toward those funding sources to make up that difference. So a year from now, when the system comes in, if we operate the same way we're currently operating, we will be looking at a significant impact for additional support at the local level. Now, things may change over that time, and there may be other things that could influence that, but we want you all to be aware of that this is a temporary solution to the problem of how the bus system is going to be funded a year from now.
And why are we having this funding shortfall? I'll let you throw them under the bus.
No, I'll try to keep it. It's
It's all formula-driven, and it's standards that they have out there, and there's this special program for small urban cities to get additional funding, and there's 6 categories. Right now, our area is eligible for 3 of those, so it's based on vehicle revenue miles that you're operating per capita, vehicle revenue hours, and I can't remember what the other one is that we're eligible for. The one that we were getting was vehicle revenue hours per capita, and we missed it by hundredths of a percent. And what it is once they figure out what your benchmark is, they base it on the national average. And that national average changes every year. So you can't really back into the number to figure it out. You just have to, make sure that your system is performing at a higher level than what we were to make sure that we get that. Moving forward to next year, our federal FY 2018 funds was based on numbers we reported in 2016. So our 2017 numbers will affect this program in 2019. And the Transit Committee had to cut service because of the loss in revenue from Auburn. So our vehicle revenue hours have been cut. So going forward, we're not even close to being able to qualify for that. So increase service and we can get back on that funding level.
Very political way to say Auburn cut their funding. Thank you. Jim.
So, Marcia, could you comment on the kind of the wrong direction on ridership that's occurred since 15 on the City Link? Gradually going down and down and down. It seems to me that the ridership by routes haven't. You say we've cut routes, so that's really where we've lost on a basis. This is the slide.
I'm trying to go back through and find that.
Yeah, this is City Link ridership, FY 08.
So 2015, I'm just going to say that was an anomaly because that was a significant jump over FY 14, and that was when fuel prices were pretty high. So we saw that's the only thing we can attribute to having such a huge increase in ridership. So if you look at 14 and 16, that's more of a growing, like how we've been growing ridership normally. So FY 15 was definitely an anomaly. FY 17 was the first year that the Transit Committee had to take a bus out of service. So you take a bus out of service, you've just lost your ridership. And then moving forward into FY 18, it's that trend going down. The service has definitely felt the impact, and if it's not a user-friendly service, people are going to find other ways to travel. So if you look at the chart below that, it shows the ridership by route. And the Lewiston route seemed to be holding steady because due to that cut in funding from Auburn, no changes were made to any of the Lewiston routes. So the impact was felt on the Auburn side more significantly. Like the downtown shuttle is seeing and FY 18 is a guesstimate based on 5 months of ridership this year. So it's just averaged it out, so it looks like it's trending down. So yeah, New Auburn, Minot Avenue, the mall shuttle, those are all seeing significant decreases moving forward. We're going the wrong way.
I will also mention that that's we probably are moving more than other people are, but nationally there is a decline in ridership on transit systems, in part because there has been an increase in car ownership. So more folks who in the past may not have had a car are now buying a car coming out of the recession. I think that's been reflected in our own numbers, where we've seen an increase in simply the number of vehicles registered. And I think the economy does have an effect on transit ridership as the cost of gasoline goes down, as people are employed. They're more willing to use their vehicles or have vehicles to use. So that, I think, nationally they're looking at about a 2% impact from folks purchasing vehicles who in the past have not had them.
But I've also heard many comments, especially from people of low income, that one of the bigger barriers for training and education and job and whatever is lack of transportation. And I think you know, the transit program is really one of the few ways that's cost-effective for them to get around. So I was hoping as we built this, and, you know, obviously some of it is impacted by what Auburn's done, but I do think the Lewiston ridership, I've been pleased to see buses pretty full, and at least certainly much more than years gone by. So I do think we need to kind of do what we can do to make the service that much more user-friendly, as you mentioned. That's an impact. And, you know, it's also, I think, listening to consultants who say, you know, where do people want to go and at what time, and if we can match that, I think that will certainly be helpful as well.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thanks, Marcia. So the last joint agency, Paul will come up and join us, is the 911 Committee. The 911 Committee, you will find in the middle of page 74, had an overall increase of $64,000, essentially $700, or a 6% increase. As a reminder, last year, the City Council adopted a fund balance policy that essentially mirrors the city's policies. It was I'm tying my tongue here, adopted by both Lewiston and Auburn. So they've agreed to the strategy that we've outlined, where depending on where the fund balance fell would depend on what level of authority could use the fund balance. And if it fell below the floor, similar to ours, it called for certain measures to bring that fund balance up to the floor that was established. In this particular case, the floor is 6%. The ceiling at the committee level is 10%. And if you look at kind of where this is going, FY17 posted an unassigned fund balance of $173,000, or just shy of 8%. Of that amount, $41,632 is above the 6% floor. And then we're looking at having, you know, if you're looking at the floor and ceiling, that's about $46,000 below the ceiling. The committee is recommending using $22,000 to assist with the FY19 budget. That way we're not using and draining it all in one year. We can have a little bit to bring forward in FY20. Clearly, the carry forward in the current year budget of $106,000 is the driving force behind the committee's overall increase. That's 83% of what we're bringing forward now. So that is what's driving that budgetary increase here. Looking at the specific categories, overall revenues increased by about $6,500. Everything is essentially flat, with the exception of a slight increase for the town of Poland assessment and an IT surcharge of $5,500. Personal services decreased by $13,700 or so, reflects the attrition of one of the vacant dispatcher's position is removed from the budget, offsetting funds for contract settlement and increases or changes in fringe benefits and so forth. One of the things that we actually recognized this year, which helped soften the blow of what we carried forward for fund balance, is the impact of attrition on health insurance. So obviously, we recognize what it does to overtime, but those employees that have left and left that position vacant are not being insured during that time period. So we decreased health insurance by about $55,600, recognizing that with those turnovers and based upon what the elections the new employees are taking, that was probably a pretty reasonable estimate for next year's budget. And we have a slight increase here in unemployment compensation of about $1,100. Contractual services rose by about $2,700. We had reductions in telephone lines of $6,000 and legals of $1,000 and training of about $7,000 since it's an off-CALIA year. That was pretty much offset by an increase in utilities. Auburn Fire is our landlord, so they allocate the utilities to us for an increase of $3,700. And maintenance and licensing for all of our software over there rose by about $8,300. And then a slight adjustment in repairs to a building of about $2,100. Supplies were flat. Fixed charges rose by $5,100. That's an increase in insurance. We had kind of two double whammies at the committee level. We had the increase in auto. That was kind of an exposure area where employees that are traveling, particularly for training, were not covered under any auto policy there. So we've added that, as well as an insurance audit, particularly for the towers and the computer equipment, generated an additional premium cost to us. Debt rose by $5,100, reflecting additional debt service for kind of the first phases of the radio projects moving forward. And then the capital outlay component is essentially flat.
Questions?
Just a reminder, the big issue here with 911 is going to be the radio replacement and the VHF versus the 800 megahertz choice that's going to have to be made. And one clarification has come out in the process since then, and that is that we've taken a closer look at the number of portable and fixed radios that would have to be replaced if we went to the 800 megahertz system. So we now have separate numbers for Auburn and Lewiston. We have more radios than Auburn does. In the past, that's been shown as part of the overall cost of the 800 megahertz system. When we come back, we'll be able to break that out for you so you can see our individual portable and fixed base radio replacement costs, if that option is chosen.
So Paul, second paragraph of your letter, I see that you'll be entering into contract negotiations with the dispatchers union, and you thought you got rid of your union negotiations, huh, when you left the party? So good luck. Good luck in this month sometime. So, and I know that you froze that position, so I'm sure there's...
Right, so we're still maintaining our minimum staffing, and it's a position that we have, since 2010, since we initially funded the position, have been unable to fill. So our turnover is still running 20-30% annually. We're losing 2 to 3 people. We have a very young staff. I think, mentioned this before. People just don't adjust well to the different overnight schedules or the midday to midnight schedules, and these are the positions that the junior employees fit. So we still struggle with turnover. Again, it's a position we haven't been able to fill, and it's actually attributed to our fund balance. It's been available to us to use to offset expenses, but I think it's one of the outliers out there. So I'm certainly recommending that we freeze funding for that position for this year, but not totally eliminate the position. So focus on stabilizing our staffing, which we have been doing. We're down to 1 vacancy with 1 person in training, and so if we could get out of that cycle, establish a better opportunity for shift changes and get people in position for longer periods of time, they might become more comfortable, and we could get senior people. So we have a very young staff. So
thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
All right. Have a nice evening.
The last kind of intergovernmental budget is the county budget. As mentioned in the city administrator's budget memo, had an overall increase of $127,165, or 4.91%, and that represents our portion of the county budget increase.
And there's not a thing we can do about it except pay it.
Except at the county budget committee level, which there's not much you can do about that either, because the county has had a larger problem with deferred maintenance than the city or the airport. And that's coming home to roost now. So good luck, Kristen and Alicia.
So, kind of taking a breather here and looking at what we're doing for Thursday night. Thursday night, we will be talking about kind of the last group of accounts, which is the miscellaneous group. Most of that budget we've already covered because it includes like health insurance and retirements and so forth. So we'll be talking about the other ones. We will be talking about the nonprofit request. And then that's kind of the first slate of general discussions. I will bring what I have or what I know to be adjustments at this point, not only from a fund balance consideration, but also adjustments in revenue and expenditures, as well as the list that you guys have been putting items on for future considerations and so forth. The last thing is the Finance Committee has pretty much drafted their recommendation. I will be bringing that on Thursday, so you know what the committee is saying as soon as possible in case there are other questions or adjustments you want to make based upon their recommendation. And then we'll go forward.
6 o'clock on Thursday?
That is my understanding.
What's that?
6 o'clock on Thursday?
Yes.
Yeah.
And can you just remind us where we are in terms of increase with the current school committee budget proposal with the county and?
As was presented before
Like-
any adjustments and?
Yeah,
Okay, yep. So.
or not percent, but
Yep, so just to kind of.
yeah.
Just to kind of remind everybody, the current year tax rate is $28.02. As presented with no adjustments whatsoever, no debt service adjustment, no school committee adjustments, revenue sharing, none of that. As presented, the tax rate was $29.14, or a $1.12 increase.
Yep.
And we already saved 39 cents of that by deferring the interest payment. So now we're at 12 cents. So, well, 12 on the city side.
That we know of.
yeah,
We are looking at, and you'll get a full kind of recap on Thursday.
It just makes me anxious at this point, though, to talk about just what the city side is, because the school and the county is so significant.
Yeah.
County's 7 cents.
Right. But add that with the school and the
Right.
12, and
Yeah.
we're still in the 80-cent range, which
Yeah,
for me is unacceptable.
We're in the 75-cent
Yeah.
range, 70 to 75 cents.
73.
Yeah,
Sorry, county is now 7 cents, not 6 cents.
It's 6 cents.
6 cents.
We're 72 then. Sorry.
72 cents.
And school rate was 55 cents.
It was initially 55. My understanding, the most recent adjustment by the committee brought that down to 54 cents.
That's,
That's right, yeah.
yeah.
We saved a penny.
Yep.
So-
I remember talking about
And
Can I
we're
ask
at
a question
12.
about that? So if the budget that was presented to us by the school committee was already minimum required local share, then getting that down more, does that mean that they've cut the budget below minimum required
No,
local
they
share?
cut the adult ed, which
But-
is not
which
part
isn't-
of the local share formula.
Yeah, adult education is outside of the essential program and services formula, so it's an add-on.
So I guess my understanding of the adult ed budget, though, also was that it pretty much held its own.
So there was a $20,500 reduction from that, and they used something else to cover it, so it like netted zero.
So they're not getting less, it's just coming from somewhere else? Okay, thank you.
So we'll do a full recap Thursday based upon where we stand, and I look forward to see
Yep, I won't be able to sleep until then.
what direction.
I literally won't be able to sleep until then because I feel so anxious about this.
that.
All right.
And just on the school funding thing, there is a piece of legislation that's still active in the legislature that has not yet been acted on that could have some impacts on school funding and the formula in particular, but no one seems to. I mean, it's been through a hearing, they had a vote on it, but they're holding it And I think they anticipate going back and revisiting it at some time in the next week or so. It better be in the next week or so, because they're running out of time in the session.
And is that favorable, the way it's approached to us?
I think the way it's out there right now, it probably doesn't have much effect at all, but there's always the possibility of it changing.
It was unclear to us,
Yeah.
Okay.
at best.
I mean, you know, there is a very famous saying, no one's life, liberty, or property is safe when the legislature's in session, so. I'm glad to see Councilor LaJoy can laugh at that.
You may not have a few months ago.
All right,
Motion to adjourn, do we need?
all right. Well, it's a workshop, so, no, you're good. Free to go.
I'm out of here.
Thank you.
We're all free.
Have a good night.
Ain't it?